I decided I was going to do a live stream at the last moment. And the reason that I'm doing this is so I do these live streams trying to keep trolls out by being careful. So I'll just pop up and then trolls aren't really notified that something's going on. And so I get fewer trolls, or I have to use like subscribers and like members and patrons only. And I do that sometimes. So I do these strategies in order to keep this out. So I want to talk about a few things here briefly. Now, there were a number of questions. I asked what topic do you want to hear about most, and I'm going to talk about this very briefly, and then I'll start to answer whatever questions that you might have. Lorenz 1973 said, uncomfortable uncertainty about what next year might bring. Yeah, we're all uncomfortable and uncertain about what that is or what's going to happen there. Still hoping that the Russian economy and the government might still crumble and fail. So, some updates on that would be useful. Okay. So, the Russian economy is not doing very well. It is struggling for a number of reasons, and those reasons are all interconnected. And so that's going to be the way that will work. So if you take it's simple supply and demand to some degree. If you take lots of people out of the mix, then what has to happen is that there are fewer workers, and so you have to pay them more money, and that creates an inflation because yeah. So there's those sort of dynamics going on, and so those could be soldiers taken from the battlefield or the upwards of a million, and not quite a million, but upwards of that have fled the country trying not to be mobilized. And so you put those two numbers together, and that's causing inflation. And then they don't want to look like they have a high inflation rate, so they're not increasing the Fed rate, whatever they call it in Russia, the equivalent of what the Fed is in the United States. The central bank doesn't want to increase that because they're trying to look like there's not a lot there, or not a lot of problems there. And so that's going to let it continue to fester. So they do have a significant problem there with in the economy, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, when people are stealing butter and going to jail for that, that's problematic. Okay. At the same time, worried that Russia might work together more closely or effectively with some other countries with devastating consequences. If if I were to tell you a couple of years ago, just before the invasion, that in 3 years the Russians are going to be being supplied by the North Koreans because they can't maintain their own armies. Um, Overtures or ambitions overseas, you wouldn't have believed me, but that's actually what has happened here. So, okay, I mean that's where the Russians are. Um, Okay. So thanks for joining us, guys. I see a bunch of you in the chat now, and it's just starting to grow. Again, nobody knew that this was going to happen. So this kind of keeps the trolls away. Okay. So nobody would have believed you if I told you that. And then next, keeping an eye on that would be useful. The next American government is such an unpredictable factor. So please explain what's happening on that front related to Ukraine. That is what I do. And people are like, well, why are you talking about the American this or that or Trump or whatever? Well, if it applies or if it could impact the war in Ukraine, yeah, I'm going to talk about that. That's important. And so uh, certainly I'll keep you abreast of what's going on with that as well. That's a stronger suit for me than talking about what's happening in this particular place on the battlefield that I can't actually pronounce very well. So thank you for that question. Thank you so much for asking. Personally, I want to hear news and information about how Ukraine is doing and how the U.S. and other democracies are helping toward victory. And then this person, Sally Lutz, said, I do not want to hear excuses or lots of talk. I'm so tired of hot air. And that's what we've seen a lot of. We've seen a lot of hot air from both the government, well, governments, I guess. There's been a lot of that. But I'm talking about the U.S. government saying, yes, we're right behind you. We're supporting you. And then, but they slow walk it, and they slow walk it for a reason. And that's because they're thinking about what's actually potentially a consequence of Putin being upset with them. Excuse me, I have a bit of a sore throat. Okay, so if you put questions in the chat, I'll start addressing your questions after one more. Okay, so thanks so much for your daily updates, much appreciated. Absolutely happy to help. I look like a troll when I get up in the morning. Okay. I can't see you, so I don't know. Um, what's the next big thing to happen in 2025? Taiwan. Okay, I'm glad you asked that because I put out a poll yesterday and I said I put out 2 polls yesterday. The first one said, "What kicks off next? Where does the next conflict flare up?" And add below if your conflict wasn't listed. And I put Belarus, Transnistria, China, Venezuela. Now I put Venezuela because on the 10th, I think it is, the actual elected president should be trying to come home, or theoretically, that could happen, and Maduro may very well arrest him if he does try that. So that's what's coming there. And then Belarus was because on the 25th of January, the Belarusian election happens. Election is really kind of a strong word for what that fraudulent b- propaganda thing was last time, and Putin had to support Lukashenko and tamp down the riots last time, and I don't know that he has the wherewithal to do that again. Transnistria, yeah, that could potentially boil over, or China with Taiwan. And so the highest vote was Transnistria with 53%, and then Belarus with 26%, China 15, and Venezuela at 7%. But the world feels like a powder keg, doesn't it? Okay, let's see your questions here. Let me move this up here and go to your questions. So let's see. Cad Roll Hunter said, "Thanks so much for your daily updates. Much appreciated." We already talked about that question. Cad Roll Hunter, how much lower will the ruble need to drop before there's an all-out crisis in Russia affecting everyone? I don't like the question because I think Putin is willing to go as low as he needs to go in order to keep going. I see zero evidence that Putin, and that's a good question. By the way, Alex just came in. Alex, I'm going to, if you don't mind, um, I'm going to add you as a moderator moving forward. You tell me if that's a problem for you. But since you're a board member, I'm just gonna like if John McElravy or other board members show up, I'm just gonna give them moderator type rights. Oh, there he is. There's John right now. So I'm gonna give you John moderator rights as well. You don't have to use it, but I'm gonna make you that. And if you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. But I think I can trust you guys pretty well. So at any rate, I think Putin will go as low as he has to go. I don't think there's anything that's really in his mind going to stop him, even if it makes it miserable for in his entire population. I don't think he cares. I think he wants to go down in history as Vladimir the Great, or Vladimir the Terrible, or Vladimir the something, and he's trying to reclaim these lands. And yeah, that's just where he's going to be. So um, yeah, I don't know that I can say that there's any place where he's not willing to go. However, that decision may be made for him if the economy collapses, but I don't know how far. I just know that I'm seeing an unhealthy symptom. So it's like, oh, you have a fever. It's 103. I'm not sure how far you can go. 103 and a half, 104, 105, 6, 7. I don't know how far it goes before it's catastrophe, but I know I'm seeing bad signs. And I'm not enough of an economist. I have enough credit hours to teach basic economic classes, right? I do it infrequently, but I'm not enough of an economist to be able to answer that particular question. Okay, John Hoover just popped up and said, "Good morning, Professor. I worry about the new UA missile that can hit Moscow, that the Russian response will be brutal. Though hitting Moscow could cause mass discontent in the population. Your thoughts?" I don't know. I'm not sure what brutal Russia could actually do short of nuclear that, I mean, they haven't already done. Like what exactly are they going to do? So you have some Orishniks and maybe you could do something with it, but I mean, if like I take some comfort in the thought that if Putin could have won, he already would have. Like think about that. Seriously. Like if he could have already won this war, he would have done it. So unlike the apologists like Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter and folks like that who are talking about, well, Putin's just restraining himself. You just wait. I mean, he could do this in no time, right? I don't think that Yeah. So Alex Kilmoff said, "I don't think that the response will be brutal. They already throw everything and the kitchen sink." Yeah, that's kind of where I am with that. If Putin falls, what do you think will happen with Orban and Fico? Well, they're already making themselves pariahs. And by the way, if I skipped your question, feel free to cut and paste it and pop it back in place again. I'm happy to try to answer you. I'm not skipping anybody intentionally. I'm just trying to go through the list and not go up and down the list. Okay, so I d well, let's see. As long as Russia's nuclear weapons are not threatened, he'll not use them. I think that's probably fair, John. That seems that's my read as well. But he'll talk, a big thing about these are Rishniks. We can do everything with them. There's nothing that can stop them. And then, he was saying this the other day. And I think I said this briefly, but the other day he said, let's have this was like 2 weeks ago. He said, "Let's have this duel. We'll send our Rishniks and you send your best defense to stop them." No, a duel would be you send your best missiles and the West sends their best missiles at you. That would be a duel, not this defense thing. Yeah. Anyway, the way that he frames things, I always find fascinating. Or the way, not just Putin, but the way that the Russians try to frame the argument is half the battle. If you reframe it properly, a lot of its intensity comes out. Okay, Mike Christopherson says, "How has Russia's defense minister been doing as a leader?" Um, he's actually done pretty well for Russia compared to, well, especially compared to his predecessor, but he's not he's not horrible. I wouldn't say that he's effective as he could be, but he has certainly done a lot to aid Russia's military production and military capacity through, say, North Korea and other sources. Um, it's kind of sad because I miss Sergei Shoigu because Shoigu was kind of incompetent. And that incompetence, like, so Shoigu is a good pal of Putin's. And so he was there because he's his pal. And that's a great thing because that is a better scenario in order to actually like have bad things continue to happen. The rash of criminal charges that we saw for stealing things or what, like everybody knew what was going on, but now they're charging things to tamp that down. It it's you could kinda look at that and say, "Yay, that's good. These bad things are happening," but they're actually making the system better. It's kinda like in the stock it's counterintuitive, but it's kinda like in the stock market. When the stock market's at a high, everybody's, happy, but at its high, it's kind of already getting out of balance, and it's about to it's like it's getting a fever, and it's gotta go down in order to get healthy again. When it's at a low, it's in its low ebb, it's actually gonna be something that's going to get healthier. It's kinda like that. I hope that makes some sense. Okay, Thomas says, "Is there a chance that Ukraine and Moldova becoming closer partners in the future to resist Russia? I'm not too well versed in the situation on Moldova's side of from their occupation." Don't know. The Moldovan president and Zelensky seem to get along swimmingly, but I don't know, there might be other cultural factors that I'm just not aware of that could be at play here. But, Transnistria is a huge stockpile of Russian weapons guarded by not a lot of Russian, personnel. And so, I mean, it seems like if Moldova gave Ukraine the green light, they could go and do whatever they would do, and I don't know, but I apparently they don't have a green light, or it seems like Ukraine would have done this already. Okay, can Ukraine Ozzy Boga says, Moldova has a neutrality clause in its constitution. Ozzy, can you expand on that a little bit and tell me what that means for the situation? Because I'm saying I don't know because I just don't know. Okay. Uh, Transnistria could kick off if not assimilated into Moldova. That's right. And so I think the conditions in Transnistria are rife for having some real uprest, some civil unrest rather, and we could see something go very badly there. And Yeah. Okay. Marcus Kirk just popped up and said, so many people talking about Trump's plan and how it'll work or not work. Ha 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 ha. Trump hasn't presented any plan yet. So why are people saying this? Well, because they're floating trial balloons about this idea or that idea, and what if this happened, and just seeing how it's rejected or welcomed, and nothing has been really well accepted by the Russian side so far. Now they're not talking directly to each other. They're just talking into the ether and then hearing it from, hey, this was reported in the news. Well, and then they answer what was reported in the news. So they're still communicating, but they're just not talking directly necessarily. Um, so, wow, thanks for answering. You're welcome. Thanks for asking the question. Ask a good question. I'll try to answer it. Ask any question. I'll try to answer it as long as it's reasonable. John Hoover says, I don't think Moldova has the assets to help significantly, as they're the poorest country in Eastern Europe. You might be right, but it's not even whether they have the assets to help, it's whether they would be okay with Ukraine going in and taking out the Russians that are there. Um, I I don't know. I just really do not know. Um, so somebody said in a comment the other day, like, I really appreciate that you don't try to overly hype or say things that you don't know about, and you're willing to say I don't know. That comes from my early academic experience. I was at a symposium at the University of Virginia, and a Nobel Prize winning economist was speaking, and a afterwards, after he gave his speech, some people were asking questions just like, uh, this was James Buchanan, by the way, of, public choice theory. That's what he won his Nobel Prize for, and they'd ask him a question, he'd be like, I don't know." The next question, "Huh, hadn't thought about that, I don't know." I'm thinking like, "Wait, you just won a Nobel Prize, but if he's not afraid to admit that he doesn't know, why should I be worried about it? Like, who am I comparatively?" So, all right. Let's see here. Ozzy Bogus. Yeah, that's not an answer here. This is I live here in Kiev, months there. Okay. Wouldn't it be a military mistake not to open another front for Ukraine? They have three going now. Well, it depends on what they could get, because I mean, if they're low on artillery and there's a huge stockpile and they could open that and they could grab that with at minimum cost, that might be useful, but it might be politically very bad to do that within someone else's sovereign country without their green light. But otherwise, and yeah, and you want to concentrate your forces and that sort of thing. So I understand. I don't know enough about it in order to. I was looking at the political side rather than the military tactics side. Okay. Sean Morgan says, when Putin goes, hopefully sooner than later, Russia could be in big trouble in the fallout of his demise. Do you think China might make a move on Manchuria? There's a lot of speculation about that. Um, I don't know whether they would. They really want Taiwan back. They don't seem to care as much about that area that is now Russian controlled, or has been Russian controlled since World War II. And I just don't know. I um, I I have to plead ignorance. I don't think the US would look at it as a positive thing for China to be grabbing a part of Russian real estate. I don't think the US wants China or what wants Russia to implode either. And that's not I mean, just generally speaking, the US doesn't want Russia to implode. They want it to hold together. Part of that is that they don't want nukes to be traveling around, and they have to tamp that down. That was the whole thing with the Budapest Memorandum. And part of that is just logistical, who you have to deal with. Um, yeah, that's all I can really say here. Speaking of multiple fronts, Jonathan McElravy says, speaking of multiple fronts, Russia has many: Cuba, Syria, Libya, let alone hybrid attacks, information warfare, and other things along those lines. So Russia has like if something bad in the world is going on, my first thought now is like, what did Russia do? Which is why I was looking at those T attacks in the United States the other day, the one in New Orleans and the one in where was the Cyber truck one? That wasn't New Orleans. That was. Texas or I'm trying to remember where it was. At any rate, in front of the Trump hotel. Um, Neither of those seem to be directly connected. Now, my wife sent me Vegas. That's right. Thank you, Marcus. Um, and my wife sent me an article that showed that the one with the cyber truck in Vegas, he this guy was a Green Beret who had voted for Trump, and his ex-wife or ex-wives, I don't remember if he had one or more, were like hard Democrats, and there was like, and he was, and wait a minute. Yeah, I think that's correct, and he actually had been in Ukraine, and then, had like, um, it's very strange, but there's no nefarious Russian connection that I could detect. Um, Aziboga again said, Moldova is officially neutral country. Neutrality is enshrined by Article 11 of the 1994 Constitution of Moldova, adopted following Moldova's defeat in Transnistria War in 1992. Thank you for for that follow up. Um, yeah, so I'm not sure how, like, Transnistria is not actually recognized by a number of countries, and so I'm not sure how that would all play out. But at any rate, thank you for adding that. The two truck attacks have more to do with veteran self deletion than anything else, and I think that's right. The best analysis that I saw with that was somebody speculating, and this was just speculation, that these two guys, both U.S. Army veterans, um, probably couldn't get the help that they needed from the Veterans Administration and were struggling with mental health issues, and that's probably more likely to be the case. We just don't know yet, and we have to say we don't know. So, um, yeah, but okay. Next, yeah, Elegant Mess. Do you think that Russia will be held accountable for war crimes they've committed? Since arriving in Ukraine, it's been horrible seeing some of the things that they've done and are continuing to do. Yeah, like, I can't even show you some things. I know that some things will be censored, by YouTube, so I can't even show you some things. Like, I was reading an article today about something think about something terrible that happens to women, particularly by Russian soldiers, by 15 of them, you see where I'm going, so that they wouldn't attack her daughter, right? I can't even bring that kind of thing forward. So these kind of crimes are happening regularly, brutalizing the population in Ukraine. And like, I want Russia to stay together, going back to that earlier point, so that Russians can be held accountable for what's going on. If they broke into constituent pieces, it would be far harder. It would also be harder to get back the children that had been stolen and brought to Russia from Ukraine as well. So, yeah, it's that kind of thing. Okay. Uh, let's see here. Hit a like if you want to promote our presenter. Thank you very much for that. Every like that you have makes YouTube say, "Hey, more people might want to see this." So thank you for hitting the like button. Those of you who have. Um, let's see. Paul from Combat Vet Reacts did a heartfelt video following those recent incidents. Yeah, I bet he did. I haven't seen that, but yeah. Second person to make an attempt on Trump's life was in Ukraine also. Yeah, so there are those kind of connections, but there's not, like, I don't think it's the same thing as something that is planned by the Russians to have some kind of impact, uh, contracts with social media folks in order to spread particular messages, that sort of thing. Um, okay, let's see here. How many US and Western companies are still operating in Russia? I don't know that number. I know that there are a lot of US companies, because I searched for this the other day, that have done a lot of good things for Ukraine, but I don't know that offhand. My question in the peace proposals, I have yet to hear about the 20,000 children kidnapped by Russia. In my opinion, that should be part of any, of course, it should be part of the negotiations. Absolutely. Like, and how the world is still asleep when this has happened in the 21st century. It's just, it's mind blowing. Um, okay. Tridents Against Tyrants channel publishes a list of that every stream. That's I guess this is the list of those that are, still operating in Russia. Okay, let's see. I'm reading up the list a little bit. I really love that quote that you have. No matter how bad things are, Russian propaganda didn't work on me. Yeah, I saw that as a meme and I thought, yeah, that's right. Like you think you're having a bad day, just think billions of dollars of Russian propaganda didn't work on you. All right. So take heart in that. Okay. Um, let's see. Sky Soldier says, I pray Ukraine wins this SMO. Then Putin will have to stand trial for his war crimes. I'd like to see that too. It a lot depends on the peace deal and how the peace is made and that sort of thing, and if it's an actual deal or if there's some kind of unconditional something that happens because of an implosion of some sort. We just don't know how that all is going to happen. I will say that it's pretty wild to watch and see that the Ukrainians tend to think that Trump is going to be a net positive in this process because and now a lot of this was pre-election hysteria and you can safely discount a lot of that as like people are just saying, well, if Trump wins, it's the end of the world, right? Okay, so all right, nobody's still saying that. Well, almost nobody is still saying that. I'm sure there are some loons on the fringe somewhere saying that, but okay, um, yeah. But I think Trump actually can serve Ukraine's interest well as long as he's serving his interest well in the process. It could go the other direction as well, but I think he could be a positive thing. Okay, do I think Adam Brown says, do I think Mike Johnson will help Ukraine or not? So, if you don't know, Mike Johnson was just reelected as the Speaker of the House for the next term. And I don't think he really matters in the sense that what matters is the direction that he gets from Trump, and he will not buck against that, I don't think. And so you look to Trump, right, and that'll tell you what Johnson is going to do. Um, Let's see. One of the things Keith Kellogg planned bullet points. So we'll talk about that more and more because it's going to shift and refine in time. So I'm not ditching you, but we'll come back to that. Rock Ruzik says one of the things that truly irritates me about Russian war crimes is the Russians flaunting their impunity. How do we take their impunity away? Yeah, I mean so that's a broader point that I've been making over the last 3 days in a number of videos about like the way to beat a bully or an oppressor is to actually call their bluff, to hit back, to do whatever rather than just let them do the thing. And yeah, so I mean, they do things. I've given the analogy they're like a toddler who just, a 2-year-old. 2-year-olds are jerks. I have a bunch of kids, and when they go through that 2-year-old phase, like they're jerks, and they're pushing the boundaries, but they push the boundaries until they realize, well, that's not a boundary I should be pushing on, and then they back up. Bullies are the same way. Tyrants are the same way. So that's how to do that. And those people that are flaunting that would be backing up if they've experienced consequences. That's the way the world works. Okay. Hello, KBG. Welcome. Okay, Ukraine has no choice but to publicly suggest that Trump would have positive impact on their effort. It wouldn't serve them well to be critical of him. Okay, so that's fair. Let's in a worst case scenario, let's say they're doing it only for that reason. They're still saying the right stuff that could make things go well for them, where Russia is still being bombastic and saying, "Who are you to say this is going to happen? We don't have to listen to you." Right? So even if that was like that's the that's the worst face on it. Let's take that scenario. Even then, the Russians aren't doing that. And why aren't the Russians doing that? Like they're missing an opportunity. Okay, John Bowie asked, "Will the war end in January, or can Russia survive until February?" So I don't think that Trump's going to come in and on day one actually fix anything. It'll be a much longer process. But Trump always speaks for effect. He never speaks for precision anyway. So if he said I'm going to fix it in 24 hours, he just means I'm going to address it. Um, and people are people ask me in comments regularly, like, "Why are you, just fanboy for Trump?" I'm not. I'm really not. I'm just saying the reality is, look at the way that he operates. He never talks for precision, but this is how you understand and interpret him. Okay. Okay, that's not for me. One last thing, I saw Kellogg's peace proposal. It favors RU and sets up round two for RU to escalate the war. Well, yes, but it's going to mutate over time. The original thing from some time ago is not the same as what will probably roll out eventually. And Ukraine is doing everything right to align itself with what the US would want them to be doing. And the Russians just keep impudently trying to poke back in the eye, so I wouldn't worry about that. Okay, Elizabeth Bowman, exactly, spot on, Elizabeth. Trump is completely transactional, and this is what makes him a wild card. He's willing to do this or do that. He's very pragmatic about things and transactional, as opposed to having an ideological core that would be able you'd be able to predict what he's going to do. Okay, um I said that I was gonna keep this short, I thought. So what other questions you have quickly, and then we'll be done because there's no need in belaboring things unless we have okay, why does the US have such a huge, military and unwilling to use it anymore? Well, so the US military believes that China's gonna pop off in 2027. That's what the U.S. military is keeping its powder dry for because they believe that that's a very high possibility, and so to get caught up in what's going on now, I think the right approach is to support Ukraine and reduce the odds that Xi will think that this is a good idea. The other position is to hold your powder for what could happen over there in the Pacific. But okay. Um, Prof, you're talking about criticism to or taking criticism to heart way too much. Online people sling mud most of the time and praise exceedingly sparingly, even when praise is due. You're doing great. Keep it up. Thank you, Rock. I appreciate that. But I'm just trying to explain why, like people people were especially before the election, Republicans were feeling that I was way too liberal, and liberals were thinking that I was way too MAGA, and I'm neither. I mean, I've told you who I am. I'm a Reagan Republican, and this is where and this is how I see things. I don't see eye to eye with Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Kamala either. I couldn't pull the lever for either of them. So okay. And it didn't matter in my state. I said I said my state would go by 400,000. It actually went by more than 5 or 600,000. Like it was a blowout in my state. So, um, John McElravy, what are your thoughts that the West wants to avoid another Vietnam or Afghanistan? Not a lot, because I don't think they're thinking they're going to get involved, and if they do get involved, it looks like, again, every military person that I know that's in the know is focused on, China right now. Like, anybody who has any kind of significant placing, they're focused on China. And, but I have not heard anybody talking about another Vietnam or Afghanistan. So I guess not a lot. That you're the first person that's raised that, that I've heard. Okay, Marcus Kirk. Oh man, when I first started watching your channel, I thought you were bashing Republicans in most of your videos. See, that's a thing. Like, I'm just trying to be fair, and I mean that's all. I'm trying to be fair. I am a conservative. I do want to see conservative policies moving forward, but the MAGA type of Republican is a populist, not a conservative, who is different in nature, even though they look kind of similar, that they're just different animals. So I'm not bashing Republicans. I'm just saying like that, and honestly, on the other side, you see this with progressives as well. Progressives that want to deplatform and that sort of like I miss the old like I'm an old school Republican. I miss old school liberals who actually just want to hear what I have to say so that they can poke a hole in my argument and we can sit and have coffee and talk about why each other are wrong and still like each other. That's where I am. And MAGA is not like that to a large degree, and progressives on the left are not like that to a large degree. So, um, Okay. That's where I am. Reagan Republican here. Well, welcome. It's a lonely club here. I remember when Biden voted for Reagan tax cuts. Yeah, Biden's gone a long way from where he started. Why did Ukraine only just turn off the gas pipelines? Shouldn't they have done it 1,000 days ago? That's a great question, and it's understandable question. So it's complex too, and I'm going to do like just a couple more questions, and then we'll be done. Give me just a moment. So the pipeline. So they had this contractual pipeline of gas through Ukrainian territory before the war began, and that was kind of normal doing business. And this contract was going to keep going until, until now. And they could have turned it off, but if they had turned that off, what would have happened to their European allies who they need as support for all kinds of things, right? So they had to weigh that against turning the pipeline off is a short-term win versus maybe losing allies in Europe. And the Europeans understood what was going on and they largely adjusted, except for, say, Slovakia. Um, so they could have done it sooner, but I think they had to thread this needle very carefully. Um, let's see. I've been trying to find footage of the recent drone strike in St. Petersburg. YouTube only has that stuff from a year ago. Does anyone have a clue? Okay, so uh, um, I talked about this briefly. My video was it appears that St. Petersburg has been hit. And I showed you a little bit about this. Greg Terry reached out to me and said, "Hey, be careful about that St. Petersburg thing. There may not be as much there as what we think, or it might be something other than what we think. We just don't know enough yet. I'm just reporting what I have seen from reasonably trusted sources. If something changes, or if that's not actually what's happened tomorrow, I'll tell you, here's what's happened." So, um, yeah, we just got to be very careful and be fair with the facts, right? And I try to also separate if something is just commentary and say, now this is just commentary. This is not. Otherwise, I'll show you the news source and then I'll explain it or even read you much of whatever before talking about it. So, okay. So that's about it. I'm going to stop there unless anyone has just a burning question that they have to get out real quick. Um, KBG says electricity prices went up here in Sweden the day after Ukraine cut the gas. Sweden has less than 1% gas dependence. That says something about the reliance of Russian gas in Europe. That's interesting that it had that much of an effect. Wow. Um, Wow. Okay. I said one last question, but this is seriously the last question. Do I think that Trump Musk want to achieve a just peace in the war? I have no idea what they actually want to do. I think that Zelensky has to be terribly vigilant to make sure that whatever comes is a just peace, not just a peace. And I wasn't trying to be funny or rhyme or whatever, but in saying that, uh, yeah, it has to be a just peace that's not going to come back. And Zelensky actually has some moral high ground to stand on. Like, look at what the Russians have been doing. Look at how they've done things over time. Look at what they did to your elections. Look at what they're doing. They're going to come back and keep doing this unless we have this just peace. And we need these kind of protections. So okay. So that's where we'll end. Thank you for your time, folks, and thank you for being willing to ask questions. Great questions, great help in answering things. Ozzy Booga, I want to give you a particular shout out for that as well, for telling us stuff about Moldova that I wasn't even familiar with. All right, that's it. I'll be back for my three big stories, which is turning out to be about 10 or 12 tonight. So thank you for that, and I'll see you later. Bye bye, guys.